Some facts deserve to be told, and others should fall into oblivion, never to be remembered again. I am uncertain into which of these two categories the events I witnessed and lived through but ultimately caused should be placed. It was some time ago that I uttered my first cry in this world. Within the old castle of Serene, a place that in a few years following my birth became the most inflamed region of the great peninsular kingdom of Lane. Much has changed since then. I did not live for long where I was born. In fact, my stay in Serene was as brief as my tender months of life. For the next 17 years, my home would be the ancient fortress of Adacre, situated on the small rocky island at the entrance to the Bay of Ador. It is recorded in the old archives of Atarik, from where I write these memories, that Adacre was for countless generations an important fortress, an indispensable strategic point in the defense of the peninsula, especially effective against the invasions of the feared Varshan, commonly known throughout the kingdom and even beyond as Black Shadows, for they had a custom of painting their faces black. The ferocity of their attacks had become legendary, the subject of various myths and folklore, but as mysteriously as they appeared, they vanished. Nothing seemed to reign on the islands they inhabited for hundreds of years, except a mysterious and icy silence of death. The most religious still speak with deep certainty of a terrible punishment, coming directly from the heavens, or perhaps from the darkest depths of hell. A calamity as dark as the blackest winter night had fallen without warning upon those people, all in response to their atrocities. The truth, less divine, is that a strange disease struck the great Varshan warriors as well as all the remaining islanders. Men and animals succumbed to the pestilence, which broke through their bodies like open sores with a putrid smell. No one dared venture to the small islands, at least no one had since these terrible rumors spread many generations ago. The fear of suffering the Varshan's affliction, a slow and painful death, kept everyone away, as long as that everyone had good sense. About 4 centuries ago, an emissary from the distant land of Brikos, a man named Hariodas Descartes, chronicled his journey to what would become the territory of Lain. In his writings, he described the arrival of a peculiar group of women never before seen in those parts. They were devout nuns, following a strange religion, worshipping an unnamed singular deity, simply referred to as the god. For many hundreds of years, the isolation of the old peninsula had kept its people faithful to the supreme gods of their sacred pantheon, led by Shigek, the Punisher, and Lasantia, the Conceiver, the creator siblings. However, the utmost devotion was always reserved for the son of these two, Olumar, the god of death, and the supreme lord of war. Under certain sealed circumstances that remain shrouded in mystery, the then king of Lane, Arcrios of the royal house of Agiton, granted these women the imposing fortress on the deserted island of Edacre. To the king's misfortune, these women did not remain so isolated, and gradually the initial small group grew from a few dozen to well over 100. The worst was yet to come when certain factions among these women emerged, inciting and launching direct attacks on the ancient and then very sacred religion of the kingdom. They burned and destroyed all the ancestral altars that had remained untouched under the protection of the surrounding forests and caves. With disdain, they shattered the sacred idols, carving crude yet deep symbols into the trunks of the trees, bleeding them, marking them forever in a rancorous and insane act on the verge of fanaticism, actions that would soon turn against them. The king's complacent stance toward these so-called religious women was not well received, immediately seen as a great affront, almost blasphemy. After all, was he not Arcrios, the protector of the kingdom? Why did he ignore such an outrage? This displeasure was something many were not willing to accept lightly, especially the proud warlords, the Alamar, who saw that group grow day by day. They felt so deeply insulted that they swore before the sovereign himself that if he did not retract the absurdity he had committed and did not take action worthy of a king, it would only have one outcome. In their words, "The stones of Adacre will turn red with blood." As a consequence of this oath, many women lost their lives atrociously, most of them innocent, having nothing to do with the committed madness. Violent attacks were initially carried out against the small groups that periodically traveled to the peninsula in search of supplies, which were always scarce on the rocky island. In an attempt to break both their determination and spirit, they were relentlessly pursued, terrorized with all sorts of tortures, violated, and beaten without any remorse worthy of a human being. Those who resisted and fought back against their aggressors faced death in the most atrocious and inhumane ways possible. Soon, their bodies would appear mutilated, disemboweled, hanged with their own entrails, exposed along the main roads, left to rot under the gaze of passers-by, in a spectacle of horrors never before witnessed. As if in a final humiliation, they would be slowly devoured by vultures until nothing was left of their bodies. The carnage was so horrendous that Hariodes himself, a real witness to these attacks, could not describe them without his quill smudging the parchments on which he recounted those events. Such was the horror he felt from those memories.
Olimar must feast tonight. Those who so fiercely revere him in this courtyard have done justice to his name once again. I hear laughter and songs of joy from these vile mouths, while far away in muddy fields, cries of pain echo lost in the air. These animals that lead them, whom they so proudly call sacred warriors of the realm, these Alamar, are nothing more than repugnant beasts that deserve to disappear from the face of this world. And with them I walk, smiling as if nothing were amiss. It no longer matters who started all this, when madness has surpassed any trace of sanity that might still exist here. Men, women, and children, I see in the eyes of all of them the thirst for vengeance and the delight in death.
These indiscriminate attacks within a few months had an unexpected turn for the great Alamar, for despite all their possible reasons, they caused the general repulsion of the population of Laine. Among the people, defenders willing to give their lives for the women of Atticree arose. In a bloody discord, which quickly spread throughout the kingdom like a flaming arrow shot in all directions, it transformed into an unprecedented civil war that would be known forever as the War of the Drudgery. Such was the repetitive monotony it had become. A war doomed to disgrace from its inception. The poor wretches who rose up, who tried to stop it, in the end would share the same fate as those they tried to defend, death. As time passed and the tragic events I mentioned came to an end, whispers began to spread throughout the kingdom that the king had embraced this new religion and abandoned all the beliefs of his ancestors. This was so widely accepted that today Archrios is known as the converted. Rumor or not, the truth is that one by one, the castes of the same lords who hated those women and swore to kill them indeed converted, all within the span of 2 generations. Only in the high mountains of Kuna do the old altars of our ancestors still stand, majestic and untouchable, where prayers and chants are whispered to the heavens almost in secrecy. Due to the extreme isolation of Atticree Island from the peninsula, I often wondered why I was taken to such a place so removed from reality. The Jumal Caesarea, sisters of the god, were mostly kind women, but they could also be very strict in their ideologies, punishing at the slightest sign of rebellion. I can say I had a good dose of rebellion, enough to drive the saintliest woman there to madness. Because of this, I felt the sting of many harsh whippings, a direct result of pushing the patience of those religious women a bit too far. Despite the tribulations I constantly caused them, they taught me things I will never forget, especially how to survive, something they knew well. Unfortunately, I did not always know how to use some of these teachings at the right time, and such indecisions would forever mark my destiny and drastically that of others. It was under the fragile light of twilight that I would climb the old watchtowers to observe the sea. There, in that imposing retreat I considered solely mine, I imagined my other life, the one that was denied to me right after my birth. Until then, I was unaware of the suffering of Eliane, my mother, and the dark history behind her marriage to my feared father, Var de Cretone, and of course, the entire story behind the creation of the county of Sardone. This county only gained its name after the strange death of the lord of the castle, Aie, my maternal grandfather, resulting in the subsequent unification of his county with the Duchy of Cretone. Until then, it was known as Sarin, the name by which they still call the castle where I was born. When I finally saw my mother again, she was little more than a shadow, perhaps more of a wandering ghost, clinging to life only by vain hopes of a justice that was long overdue, justice that year after year was denied to her. Her honey-colored eyes, once vivid and expressive, had become distant and opaque. The dark circles around them were proof of the many nights of crying and suffering she had endured. Pale as a white marble slab, she rarely removed the veil she constantly wore to cover her face. I know little about my maternal grandfather, remembered as an austere and stern man, but above all, an honorable and sensible one, who enforced the laws of his county exemplarily. Because of this, he was both loved by those who served him and detested by many of his peers. He spent 7 long years on the Elita, the sacred quests, participating in an unfortunate campaign where, north of the holy city of Chapraz, he suffered a terrible ambush, losing both his sons, Elis and Aetoris, who accompanied him on that ill-fated journey. He survived almost by a miracle. Elissa, my maternal grandmother, from whom I inherited my name, fared no better. After enduring the premature deaths of her sons and waiting for about 8 years for her husband's return from the Elita, she succumbed to the plague, which she contracted during a trip to the county of Arayen. She arrived in Surin with very high fevers, in deep agony. She was immediately taken to the most secluded part of the castle due to fear of contagion. It didn't take long for her to start delirious and lose touch with everything around her. Those were days of great torment for my grandfather and my mother, who at the time was just a child, meeting the man she believed to be her father for the first time since her birth, to her nothing more than a total stranger. The annex where the Lady of Sarin spent her last days was burned down shortly after her death to purge any remnants of the disease that might have lingered. Even today, the black marks of the flames can still be seen on some of the stones. Due to her premature death, whispers still circulate the castle that her spirit never left, watching over those she loved in life, and consequently all her descendants. I believe it was her presence that helped my mother overcome everything that happened there, not many years later. I would not know much of this sad story if it weren't for Anjou de Chatir. Ironically, one of the Knights of the Purple Rose of Agitan, now the elite guard of the Kings of Lane. Anjou met my mother when she was about 17 years old and witnessed the changes and tragedies preceding my birth. Anjou was one of the men who came to fetch me from the fortress. I remember how nervous I was about to leave my exile and return to the place where I was born. From that day, not only would my life change, but so would the lives of everyone around me.